Look around you for a moment. The buildings that touch the sky, the roads that stretch across continents, the machines that hum day and night, the food that fills every market stall, the electricity that lights every home. Now ask yourself a simple question. Who makes all of this possible? Is it the banker sitting behind a glass desk? Is it the shareholder who has never stepped into a factory? Is it the owner whose name shines on the company sign? No, it is you, the worker, the builder, the driver, the farmer, the teacher, the nurse, the laborer whose hands shape the world. And here lies the greatest contradiction of modern society. A contradiction that thinkers like Karl Marx exposed with ruthless clarity. Those who create everything own almost nothing. Those who own everything create almost nothing. This is not an accident. This is not an accident. This is not a misunderstanding. This is the design of capitalism itself. Labour creates all wealth, yet this simple truth is often hidden beneath layers of economic language, political propaganda, and social conditioning. From the earliest moments of human history, the transformation of nature into something useful has always required human effort. The soil does not cultivate itself. Machines do not assemble themselves, and cities do not rise from the ground without the coordinated labour of countless individuals. Every product that exists in society, every service that sustains daily life, and every piece of infrastructure that supports civilization carries within it the invisible imprint of human work. Wealth, therefore, is not born in bank accounts, nor does it emerge from ownership papers. It emerges from labour, from the physical and intellectual effort of people who shape the world around them. When a worker steps into a factory, a field, a hospital, a classroom, or a construction site, they are doing something fundamental to the functioning of society. They are converting raw materials, knowledge, and natural resources into something valuable. A farmer transforms land and seeds into food that feeds entire populations. A construction worker turns steel, cement, and labor into buildings that shelter families and businesses. A technician operates machines that produce goods by the thousands. Even in modern industries that appear less physical, such as technology or services, it is still the mental and creative labor of workers that generates value. Without the human mind and the human hand guiding production, the resources of the earth would remain dormant and unused. The capitalist system attempts to present a different narrative. It often claims that wealth is created by investment, by ownership, or by the decisions of executives and investors who control businesses. But investment alone produces nothing. Money sitting in a vault does not build roads, harvest crops, or manufacture products. Ownership of a factory does not cause machines to operate. A machine without a worker is nothing more than silent metal. A field without a farmer is nothing more than unused land. Even the most advanced automated systems require the labor of engineers, technicians, and operators to design, maintain, and supervise them. Labor remains the central force that brings production to life. Karl Marx described this reality through the concept of labor as the source of value. In his analysis, the value of commodities arises from the amount of socially necessary labor required to produce them. This means that behind every product lies a chain of human effort. The miner who extracted raw materials, the worker who refined them, the machinist who shaped them, the driver who transported them, and the employee who distributed them. Each step adds labor, and through that labor, value is created. The wealth of entire nations is therefore not the result of abstract markets, but the accumulated labor of millions of workers contributing to production over time. Yet despite being the true creators of wealth, workers rarely receive the full value of what they produce. Instead, a portion of the value generated by their labor is claimed by those who own the means of production. The capitalist purchases labor power through wages, paying the worker only enough to sustain their ability to continue working. But during the working day, the laborer produces more value than the wage they receive. This difference between the value created and the wage paid becomes profit. That profit accumulates in the hands of the owners, shareholders, and corporate elites who control the productive system. This process creates a profound imbalance within society. The very individuals who generate the wealth of the world often struggle to secure basic stability, while those who control capital accumulate enormous fortunes without directly participating in the labor that produces it. Entire industries rise through the dedication and effort of workers, yet the rewards of that effort are distributed unevenly. Factories expand, corporations grow, and financial markets flourish, all while the worker remains dependent on wages that rarely reflect the true value of their contribution. The recognition that labor creates all wealth is therefore not merely an economic observation. It is a revelation about the structure of power within society. Once workers understand that every industry depends on their effort, the illusion of their powerlessness begins to fade. The production of food, transportation, healthcare, technology, and infrastructure all depend on labor. Without workers, supply chains collapse, industries halt, and economies stall. The entire structure of modern society relies on the continuous activity of those who produce, build, maintain, and operate the systems that sustain everyday life. Understanding this truth transforms the way society can be viewed. Wealth is not an abstract force flowing through financial markets. It is the direct result of human activity interacting with the material world. Every innovation, every building, every product, and every advancement in civilization has been shaped by workers whose labor transforms possibility into reality. When this reality becomes clear, the foundations of economic inequality appear not as natural outcomes but as social arrangements that determine who controls and benefits from the wealth that labor creates. Capitalism thrives on worker exploitation, though it rarely presents itself in those terms. Instead, it appears as a system of opportunity, productivity, and economic freedom. Beneath this surface, however, lies a fundamental relationship between labor and capital that determines how wealth is created and distributed. In this relationship, the worker sells their labor power in exchange for wages, while the owner of capital purchases that labor to generate profit. This exchange appears voluntary and equal. Yet the structure of the system ensures that the worker consistently produces more value than they receive. The difference between what the worker is paid and the value their labor generates becomes the source of profit, allowing capital to grow and accumulate in the hands of those who own the means of production. To understand this process, it is necessary to examine how labor operates. Within capitalist production, when a worker enters a factory, an office, a warehouse, or a field, they do not merely perform tasks. They produce value through their effort and time. During the working day, the worker generates goods or services that can be sold in the market. The value of these commodities reflects the labor required to produce them. Yet, the worker's wage represents only a portion of that value. The capitalist purchases labor power for a fixed amount, but extracts more value from it during the working process. This surplus value becomes the foundation of profit, making exploitation not an accident within capitalism, but a central mechanism that allows it to function. The system relies on the fact that workers do not own the tools, machines, factories, or resources required for production. Because these means of production are privately owned, workers must sell their labor in order to survive. Without wages, they cannot secure food, housing, or basic necessities. This dependency creates a condition where the worker has little choice but to accept the terms established by the owners of capital. Even when wages rise or working conditions improve, the underlying relationship remains the same. The worker must continue selling labor, while the capitalist continue extracting surplus value. Competition between businesses intensifies this dynamic. Each capitalist seeks to maximize profit while reducing costs in order to outperform rivals in the market. Because labor represents one of the primary costs of production, there is constant pressure to extract more productivity from workers while minimizing the wages paid to them. This pressure can take many forms, including longer working hours, increased workloads, tighter supervision, or the replacement of stable employment with precarious forms of labor. Advances in technology, while capable of reducing the burden of work, are often used to increase output and profitability rather than to improve the lives of those performing the labor. The global expansion of capitalism has extended this process across borders. Corporations frequently shift production to regions where labor is cheaper and regulations are weaker. Workers in these areas are often subjected to long hours, low wages, and unsafe conditions, while the goods they produce generate enormous profits in international markets. The system benefits from these disparities, creating a hierarchy of labor in which some workers are paid less precisely because they are more vulnerable within the global economy. The exploitation of labor becomes not only a local phenomenon, but a worldwide structure linking workers in factories, farms, mines, and service industries across continents. Ideology plays a powerful role in maintaining this arrangement. Capitalism promotes the belief that success results purely from individual effort, encouraging workers to see economic outcomes as personal achievements or failures, rather than as products of structural conditions. The idea that hard work inevitably leads to prosperity obscures the reality that many workers remain trapped in cycles of low wages and insecurity despite their effort. By framing inequality as the result of personal merit rather than systemic design, the system discourages workers from questioning the distribution of wealth and power. At the same time, workers are often placed in competition with one another. They compete for jobs, promotions, and wages, which fragments their collective strength. This competition prevents workers from recognizing their shared position within the economic structure. Instead of seeing themselves as members of a class with common interests, they are encouraged to view each other as rivals within a market that rewards only a few. The fragmentation of worker solidarity allows exploitation to continue without unified resistance. Crises within capitalist economies further reveal the dependence of the system on labor exploitation. Periods of economic downturn often lead to layoffs, wage reductions, and austerity measures that shift the burden of crisis onto workers. While profits may decline temporarily, the costs of economic instability are frequently absorbed by those whose livelihoods depend on wages. The system restructures itself by intensifying labor or reducing social protections, ensuring that profitability can be restored even when workers experience hardship. As capital accumulates, wealth becomes increasingly concentrated among a smaller segment of society. The owners of corporations, financial institutions, and major industries control vast resources and decision-making power, while the majority who generate the wealth remain dependent on employment. This concentration reinforces the conditions that make exploitation possible, since those who control capital also influence economic policy, labor laws, and political institutions that shape the conditions under which workers live and work. The persistence of exploitation under capitalism reflects a structural relationship rather than a temporary flaw. Profit requires surplus value, Surplus value arises from labor, and labor is purchased under conditions where workers do not control the means of production. The system therefore depends on maintaining a workforce that produces more than it receives, ensuring that the accumulation of wealth continues to flow toward those who own and control capital, while the labor that sustains the entire structure remains bound within the conditions that make such extraction possible. Workers hold the true power of society, though this power often remains hidden beneath the structures and institutions that dominate modern life. Every functioning aspect of civilization depends on the continuous activity of people who labor each day to produce, maintain, and operate the systems that sustain human existence. The factories that manufacture goods, the farms that produce food, the transportation networks that move resources across nations, the hospitals that preserve life, and the infrastructure that connects entire societies all rely on workers. Without the presence and effort of those who perform this labor, these systems would fall silent. Machines would stop running, supply chains would break apart, and the flow of goods and services that supports everyday life would come to a halt. This reality reveals a contradiction within the structure of capitalist society. The worker who provides the essential energy that keeps the economy moving is often treated as if they possess little influence over the direction of that economy. The ownership of factories, corporations, and financial institutions grants immense authority to a small group of individuals who control the means of production. These owners make decisions about investment, employment, and distribution of wealth, while the workers who actually produce the wealth are expected to follow instructions and accept wages determined by those above them. Yet, despite this concentration of authority, the practical functioning of society remains entirely dependent on the labor of the working class. When a worker enters a workplace, they contribute more than just physical effort. They bring knowledge, skill, coordination, and creativity that allow production to occur. A single industry is rarely the result of isolated individuals working independently. It is the product of collective human activity. In a factory, hundreds or thousands of workers coordinate their actions to transform raw materials into finished goods. In a hospital, doctors, nurses, technicians, cleaners, and administrators must cooperate in order to provide care. In agriculture, the work of planting, harvesting, transporting, and distributing food requires an entire network of labor operating together. This interdependence reveals that the real strength of workers lies not only in individual effort, but in their collective capacity to sustain complex systems. The power of workers becomes most visible when that collective activity is interrupted. Throughout history, moments when workers withdraw their labor have demonstrated how essential their role is. Strikes and work stoppages show that production does not continue automatically. When labor pauses, industries slow down or cease altogether. Factories stand idle, transportation halts, and economic activity declines. These moments reveal that the apparent stability of society depends on the ongoing participation of the working population. The power that seems to belong to institutions and corporations is, in reality, sustained by the labor of millions whose daily work keeps those institutions functioning. Despite this potential influence, workers are often encouraged to see themselves as isolated individuals rather than members of a broader social class. Economic competition encourages people to compete for employment, promotions, and wages, which can obscure the shared position they occupy within the system. When workers view each other primarily as competitors, it becomes difficult for them to recognize the collective power that emerges from cooperation and solidarity. The fragmentation of the workforce therefore serves to weaken the awareness of the strength that workers possess when they act together. The organization of workers has historically been one of the primary ways this collective strength becomes visible. When workers form associations, unions, or movements that represent their shared interests, they begin to transform from individuals negotiating alone into a collective force capable of influencing economic conditions. Organized labor has often secured improvements in wages, working hours, and safety by asserting that production cannot continue without the participation of those who perform the work. These achievements illustrate that workers possess leverage within the economic system because their labor is indispensable to the creation of wealth. Beyond economic influence, workers also shape the social and political life of societies. The experiences of work, the conditions under which people labor, and the distribution of wealth influence the development of laws, institutions, and public policies. When large numbers of people demand change, governments and political systems often respond because the stability of society depends on maintaining the cooperation of the population. The participation of workers in political movements, social campaigns, and democratic processes demonstrates that the power of labor extends beyond the workplace into the broader structure of society. The recognition that workers hold the true power of society does not suggest that this power is automatically exercised. It exists as a potential that becomes visible only when workers recognize their shared role in sustaining the systems around them. The functioning of modern civilization depends on countless forms of labor carried out every day across industries and communities. From the construction of infrastructure to the maintenance of public services, from the production of technology to the cultivation of food, the activity of workers forms the foundation upon which economic and social life is built. When the contribution of labor is understood in this way, the image of society begins to change. The structures that appear powerful from the outside are revealed to rely on the coordinated work of people whose efforts often remain unnoticed. The continuity of production, transportation, healthcare, communication, and education all depend on the steady participation of those who perform the work required to keep these systems operating. Within this network of human activity lies the underlying force that sustains the entire social order, a force rooted in the collective labor of millions whose daily actions maintain the movement of society itself. Unity of the working class is essential because the strength of workers does not lie only in their individual labor, but in their collective power. A single worker standing alone in front of a vast corporation possesses little influence over wages, working conditions, or the organization of production. The worker must often accept the terms that are offered because survival depends on continued employment. Yet when workers recognize that their position is shared by millions of others who sell their labor under similar conditions, a new understanding begins to emerge. The isolated individual transforms into part of a larger social force whose combined labor sustains entire economies. In capitalist society, the working class forms the majority of the population. These are the people who operate factories, drive transportation networks, cultivate agricultural land, construct buildings, maintain infrastructure, provide services, and sustain the institutions that allow daily life to function. Despite their essential role, workers are frequently separated by divisions that weaken their ability to act together. Differences of nationality, race, culture, language, and occupation are often emphasized in ways that fragment the shared identity that could otherwise unite them. These divisions create barriers that prevent workers from recognizing the common interests that arise from their shared relationship to labor and production. The structure of the capitalist economy actively encourages this fragmentation. Workers compete for employment opportunities, promotions, and higher wages. This competition can make it appear as though other workers are rivals rather than allies. Employers benefit from this situation because a divided workforce is less capable of resisting exploitation. When workers are isolated from one another, each person negotiates alone, lacking the collective leverage that could challenge unfair conditions. By maintaining competition among workers, the system preserves the balance of power in favor of those who control the means of production. Unity begins when workers understand that their struggles are not purely individual experiences, but reflections of broader social conditions. Low wages, long hours, unsafe workplaces, and economic insecurity are rarely the result of personal shortcomings. They arise from the structural organization of production and the distribution of power within society. When workers recognize that others face similar challenges, solidarity begins to develop. Solidarity transforms isolated grievances into shared demands, creating the possibility for collective action aimed at improving conditions for everyone. Throughout history, moments of worker unity have demonstrated the potential of collective strength. Labor movements have often emerged when workers realized that acting together could achieve results that would be impossible for individuals alone. Through organization, workers have been able to demand fairer wages, reduced working hours, safer working environments, and legal protections against abuse. These achievements were rarely granted voluntarily by those who held economic power. They were secured through persistent cooperation among workers who refused to accept exploitation as inevitable. The importance of unity extends beyond specific workplace demands. When workers organize collectively, they begin to challenge the broader social arrangements that determine how wealth and power are distributed. A united working class possesses the capacity to influence economic policies, labor laws, and political institutions. Governments and corporations cannot easily ignore the demands of large groups of organized people whose labor is essential to the functioning of society. Collective action, therefore, becomes a mechanism through which workers can reshape the conditions under which they live and work. Unity also allows workers to overcome the fear that often accompanies economic dependency. When individuals act alone, the risk of losing employment or facing retaliation can discourage them from speaking out against injustice. The presence of collective organization reduces this vulnerability by ensuring that no single worker stands alone. When many people act together, it becomes far more difficult for employers or institutions to silence dissent without disrupting the entire process of production. In this way, unity transforms fear into confidence and replaces isolation with mutual support. The global nature of modern capitalism further strengthens the need for worker unity across borders. Production networks now extend across continents, linking workers in different countries through shared supply chains and industries. Corporations may move operations from one region to another in search of lower labor costs or weaker regulations. If workers remain divided by national boundaries, this mobility allows capital to exploit differences between regions, and international solidarity among workers can counterbalance this dynamic by recognizing that the challenges faced by labor are often interconnected across the world economy. Unity does not erase the diversity that exists among workers, but it emphasizes the shared foundation of their social position. Regardless of cultural or geographic differences, workers participate in the same fundamental process of selling their labor to survive while contributing to the creation of wealth. Recognizing this common reality can foster cooperation that transcends the divisions that have historically weakened labor movements. The development of shared goals and collective strategies allows workers to address both immediate concerns and broader questions about how society organizes production and distributes resources. The concept of working class unity reflects an understanding that power in society ultimately arises from collective human activity. Every industry depends on cooperation among large numbers of people performing different roles within the process of production. When this cooperation becomes conscious and organized, workers begin to see themselves not merely as participants in an economic system, but as agents capable of influencing the direction of that system. Through solidarity and shared purpose, the working class can transform scattered efforts into coordinated action that shapes the conditions of labor and the structure of society itself. Collective action can transform the system because the structures that govern society are not immovable forces of nature. They are the result of human relationships, economic arrangements, and political decisions shaped over time. The organization of production, the distribution of wealth, and the rules that define labor and ownership were created through historical processes influenced by groups of people acting together. If systems are built through collective human activity, they can also be changed through collective human action. For workers, this understanding is essential because their shared position within the economy gives them a unique capacity to influence the direction of social and economic development. In capitalist society, the majority of people depend on wages for survival. They work in factories, offices, fields, hospitals, schools, transportation networks, and countless other institutions that allow modern life to function. Each individual worker may appear small within the immense scale of the global economy, yet when viewed together, the working class forms the central force that sustains production and circulation. Every product manufactured, every service delivered, and every system maintained depends on the coordinated effort of workers across different sectors. This interconnected labor creates the foundation upon which economic systems operate. Because production relies on this collective effort, workers possess a potential influence that extends far beyond their individual workplaces. When people begin to recognize that their challenges are shared by others who occupy similar roles within the economy, cooperation becomes possible. Collective action emerges when individuals move beyond isolated concerns and unite around common demands related to wages, working conditions, security, and fairness in the distribution of wealth. These shared concerns can lead to organized efforts that seek to alter the balance of power between labor and those who control capital. History provides many examples of how collective action has influenced social change. Movements formed by workers have secured shorter working hours, improved safety regulations, the right to organize unions, and protections against exploitation. These changes were rarely granted automatically. They were achieved through persistent cooperation among large groups of people who recognized that unity could challenge existing conditions. When workers organize strikes, demonstrations, or other forms of collective press, sure, they draw attention to the essential role their labor plays in maintaining economic activity. The effectiveness of collective action lies in its ability to disrupt the normal functioning of systems that depend on cooperation. Production, transportation, communication, and distribution rely on the continuous participation of workers performing their roles. When large numbers of people withdraw their labor or demand changes simultaneously, institutions and industries are forced to respond. This pressure can lead to negotiations, reforms, or broader transformations in how economic relationships are structured. Collective action, therefore, operates as a mechanism through which workers can influence decisions that might otherwise remain concentrated in the hands of a small group of owners or executives. Beyond immediate economic demands, collective action can also reshape political and social institutions. Governments often respond to organized public movements because political stability depends on maintaining the participation and support of the population. When workers and communities mobilize together, they can influence legislation, labor policies, and public programs that affect education, healthcare, housing, and social welfare. These changes can gradually alter the structure of society by redistributing resources and redefining the responsibilities of institutions toward the people they serve. Collective action also encourages the development of solidarity among individuals who might otherwise remain separated by differences in occupation, background, or geography. Through participation in shared movements, workers begin to recognize the connections between their experiences and the broader patterns within the economic system. This recognition strengthens cooperation and fosters a sense of common purpose that extends beyond personal circumstances. Solidarity allows individuals to support one another in pursuing goals that benefit the wider community rather than only isolated interests. In modern economies, the interconnected nature of global production makes collective action even more significant. Supply chains stretch across continents, linking workers in manufacturing, transportation, technology, and service industries into complex networks of production. The disruption or coordination of labor in one sector can influence many others, demonstrating how deeply interconnected economic systems have become. When workers in different regions or industries act together, their influence can extend across national boundaries, affecting corporations and markets that operate on a global scale. The transformation of systems through collective action does not occur instantly or without challenges. Organizing large groups of people requires communication, trust, and sustained effort. Workers must overcome divisions that can weaken cooperation, including competition for jobs, cultural differences, and unequal access to resources. Despite these obstacles, the history of social change shows that organized movements have repeatedly altered institutions that once appeared permanent. Understanding the potential of collective action changes the way individuals view their role within society. Instead of seeing themselves only as participants in an economic structure defined by others, workers can recognize their capacity to influence that structure through cooperation and shared effort. The daily labor that sustains industries and institutions also creates the possibility for organized movements capable of demanding change. Through collective organization, workers can connect their individual experiences to broader social forces and transform scattered grievances into coordinated efforts that challenge existing arrangements and resistance. The conditions under which labor and society operate. The truth we arrive at is not complicated, yet it is profoundly unsettling for those who benefit from the current order. Society presents itself as if power flows downward from corporations, governments, and the wealthy elite who appear to control the world. But when we examine the foundations of that power, we discover something different. Every institution, every industry, every structure of wealth ultimately depends on the continuous labor of ordinary people. The worker who builds, transports, heals, teaches, grows food, and maintains the machinery of civilization is not merely a participant in society. They are its foundation. The system endures only because the working class continues to produce, continues to cooperate, and continues to sustain the economic engine that drives modern life. Yet, for generations, workers have been encouraged to see themselves as weak, replaceable, and isolated. They are told that success belongs only to individuals, that inequality is natural, and that the structures of power surrounding them are permanent and unavoidable. These ideas conceal a deeper reality. The same labor that sustains the system also holds the potential to reshape it. When workers recognize that they create the wealth of society, the illusion of dependency begins to fade. When they understand that exploitation is not a personal failure but a structural condition, awareness begins to grow. And when that awareness transforms into unity, the scattered energy of millions becomes a collective force capable of altering the balance of power itself. History has repeatedly shown that when the working class organizes, speaks with a common voice, and acts together, even the most entrenched systems begin to shift. This is the meaning of collective power. It is not found in the wealth of a few or the authority of institutions, but in the cooperation of the many who sustain society through their labor. The factories, cities, farms, networks, and technologies that define modern civilization exist because workers bring them to life every day. If that labor is withdrawn, even briefly, the entire structure begins to tremble. This reality reveals that the true engine of society has never been capital alone, but the people whose work transforms resources into prosperity. Understanding this truth changes the way the world can be seen. The working class is not merely a group within society. It is the force that makes society possible. When workers stand divided, their strength remains hidden and the system continues unchanged. But when they recognize their shared interests, support one another, and act together, their influence becomes impossible to ignore. In that moment, what once appeared to be an unchangeable system begins to reveal itself as something shaped by human choices and human cooperation. The future of society will not be determined solely in boardrooms, financial markets, or centers of political power. It will be determined wherever workers begin to see their labor not as isolated effort, but as part of a collective force capable of shaping the direction of history. The moment people understand that the wealth of the world flows from their work is the moment they begin to question why that wealth is distributed as it is. And the moment they recognize their unity is the moment the foundations of transformation begin to take shape. Because if the worker stops, production stops. If the worker withdraws cooperation, the machinery of society falls silent. And when the people who build the world recognize that power, they begin to understand that the system they sustain is ours. Oh, a system they have the ability to change.